The similarities of the Leveson report and the Finkelstein Inquiry. The Leveson report and the Finkelstein Inquiry are two issues that have a lot of similarities. However, in their approaches to change journalism, Leveson activated the media, whereas Finkelstein did not. What did Leveson do right to gain the support of the British media? Or what did Finkelstein do wrong to the support of his? The Leveson report was launched in 2011 in order to counter the increased amount of reports of phone hacking in the UK. Phone hacking scandal, despite being a long-run issue, was sparked when News of the World, a paper under the News International umbrella, hacked the phone of a murdered teenager. The general public was simultaneously horrified, but pushed into action, demanding that something be done to stop the actions. However, who should they focus their disbelief on? The journalists that committed the hack? The company that they worked for in allowing their employees to commit the act? Or the regulatory committee, the Press Complaints Council, for not dealing with the issue when it first came to light? The report was commissioned by the British government and focused on two areas. The first was the culture, practices and ethics of the press, including contacts between the press and politicians and the press and the police. It is to consider the extent to which the current regulatory regime has failed and whether there has been a failure to act upon any previous warnings about media misconduct. The second being the extent of unlawful or improper conduct within News International, other media organisations or other organisations. It will also consider the extent to which any relevant police force investigated allegations relating to News International and whether the police received corrupt payments or were otherwise complicit in misconduct. If we compare this to the brief given to the Finkelstein Inquiry, we can see significant similarities. The Finkelstein Inquiry was tasked to investigate the effectiveness of the current media codes of practice in Australia. Sounds a little similar to the core aim of the first part of the Leveson report, doesn't it? A second part of the brief states the inquiry is looking for ways of substantially strengthening the independence and effectiveness of the Australian Press Council. This is, again, something Leveson was commissioned to do in the UK. And the final similarity in the brief is when it states an interest in any related issues pertaining to the ability of the media to operate according to regulations and codes of practice and in the public interest. Could it be that Finkelstein was masking a preemptive strike against the callousness that was shown within British media? The similarities suggest that Finkelstein was preparing to interject before anything to the extent of the phone hacking scandal became a reality in Australia. Also, if you take a look at the time frame in which everything happened, the Finkelstein report was commissioned just 2 months after that of Leveson, and, as explained before, aimed to investigate similar areas to that of Leveson. Also, if you look at the recommendations made, despite being made through what Margaret Simons argues as a weighty and scholarly, though admirably clearly written report, they are along the same lines as that of Leveson. The first part of the Leveson report found that the existing council, the Press Complaints Council, had not performed its role adequately, and called for the creation of an independent council to replace it, something the government was keen for. By removing the self-regulating element of journalism, the government could now at least exert an element of restriction on what the press could publish, albeit through a third party. This was accompanied by increasing the power of the existing Ofcom system to punish papers more severely. However, by attempting to enshrine the changes in the law, Leveson had faced a lot of opposition from the papers, namely as they believe the papers can deliver Leveson principles far more quickly without legislation, better for public and free speech. As tweeted by Lloyd Embley, Editor-in-Chief of the Daily Mail. Aside from this, the papers are in support of the reforms, keen to show the public that they are still trustworthy. However, the second part of the report cannot be conducted until court proceedings against News International are concluded. If we look at the recommendations Finkelstein makes, it states, to rectify existing and emerging weaknesses in the current regulatory structures, it is recommended that there be established an independent statutory body, which may be called the News Media Council, to oversee the enforcement of standards of the news media. It is envisaged that the body would take over the functions of both the APC and the News and Current Affairs Standards functions of the ACMA, and follows with the News Media Council should be free from the influence of the executive. This will require certain structural arrangements. However, the key difference is the way in which the recommendations were received. Rather than being embraced yet open for discussion like in the UK, the Finkelstein report drove a wedge between practicing journalists and the academics of journalism. The journalists believed that the recommendations strove to remove free speech and the freedom of the press, while educators believed it was a step in the right direction of the ethics of journalism. It was this divide that saw the end of any progress the Finkelstein Inquiry hoped to make with those it wanted to affect, instead voicing opinions to the contrary of what the inquiry hoped to achieve. However, it wasn't all smooth sailing for Leveson either. Leveson had to edit the method of implementation, especially on the legal side, to secure the media's backing. There were also those who spoke out against the reforms suggested. Shami Chakrabarti claimed that the extra power of Ofcom would in fact breach human rights. J.K. Rowling also spoke out in The Guardian, stating, "I feel duped and angry at David Cameron's reaction to Leveson. If the Prime Minister didn't want to implement the report, why are people like me asked to relive our painful experiences in public?" These are just a flavour of the outcries, but embody some of the strongest held opinions and highlight a quote of the logistical landmines that have to be navigated. So, overall, the influence that Leveson has on Finkelstein is large. From the brief it had to operate within to recommendations it makes, the report masks the Leveson-esque feel through a rewording and the later dates on publishing and starting. You cannot ignore the similarities that are evident here.